the culture of Western civilization. Each of the elements, the enslavement of the people of Israel, their liberation, the journey through the wilderness, the arrival in Promised Land, each of these are part of the sort of deep structures of Western political culture. And Michael Waltz is a very, very sensitive writer. It's a wonderful book. It's a really good Pesach book, to get ready for Passover. And it would be worth. The other book I would suggest, because I just found it very touching, is a book that came out about 2 years ago. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a writer for The Atlantic, and he wrote a book called Letter to My Son. And in that book, what he does is he talks about what it means to be a black man in America, and the sense of the fear and the oppression, and the sense of being watched. That his body, the statement he makes is, "My body doesn't belong to me," will give you a sense of some of the things of the slavery part of the Exodus story. It's a very disturbing and wonderful and interesting, revealing kind of book. Here we are. We're going to begin the liberation. This is the great denouement, the great. So take out your chumash. You have a chumash? No. Did we get enough chumashim? Do we have enough to share, or do we need some more? We need more. Oh, gosh. Find a maintenance person, if you can, and tell them we need about 20 of these. I don't know why they do this to me. I'll read it. Yeah, okay. We're on page 399, if you have a chumash. Ready? We'll do it together. Ready? I'll read it out loud so you'll get it. Oral Torah. Okay? So where did we leave off last time? The 10th plague comes. And Pharaoh says to Moses, "Leave. Get out of my land. Go. Just go." And the people Israel, they pick up and they go. They leave. Let me see if I can find the last end of the Torah. I'm looking. Just wait 1 second. 399 is the Torah portion. But what happens is in the last Torah portion is, here it is. Okay, here it is. Right, in the middle of the night, this is on page, just if you want to look back quickly, 387. In the middle of the night, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with all the courtiers in Egypt, because there was a loud cry in Egypt. There was no house where there was not someone dead. And he summoned Moses and Aaron in the night. And he said, "Up, depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you. Go, worship the Lord as you said. Take your flocks and your herds as you've said, and be gone." Now the idea that he does this in the middle of the night, this is very unbecoming of Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a daytime fellow. He is, after all, Ramses, the son of Ra, the sun god. The fact that in the middle of the night, this is his policy move, tells you what kind of desperation, what a desperate man he is. And the Torah adds, thank you so much. The Torah adds one tiny line at the end of that speech. He says, "Take your people, take your flocks, take your belongings, and get the hell out of my country. Go, do what you said, just go away." And then the Torah adds one line at the end, which is a clue to his psychology. It's a clue to the inner life of this man, Pharaoh. And he says, "Take your flocks and your herds," on page 387, verse 32, "and may you bring blessing upon me also." In Hebrew, it's much more direct, right? "Uverachtem gam oti." Get out of my land, get out of my people, get out of my face. Bless me too. Bless me too. What kind of man says, "Bless me too"? Desperate. Come on, give me that psychology. Bless me. I want you to go. I hate you. I don't want to ever see you again. Just go. And when you go, bless me too. Is it just in case? That's calculating, but it could be, yeah. It's a surrender. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
But I was going to say, he was just in case, you're right, but somebody already said.
I don't know if it's just in case. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's this desperate sense of he needs
help too.
It's his surrender.
Yeah, but he says OT.
Yeah.
He doesn't even say Otanu.
No. It's always been OT. It's always been OT. It's always been just him. Even his officers said, let them go after several plagues. But it's always been about him. So the next morning, the people up and we all went. You remember you were there. You all went, right? And this is the beginning of this week's Torah portion. Now Pharaoh let the people now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, though it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. God led the people round about by the wilderness, the Sea of Reeds. They went the long way home. Why'd they go the long way home?
They didn't have a GPS.
That's true. And men will never ask for directions, right? Moses would not stop and say, could you show me the way to... But there was the idea is that the journey is not just about getting from here to there, physically. The journey is about getting from here to there, spiritually, psychologically, the internal journey. The Torah, after all, is a road story. Now, for just a moment, consider that. In Western civilization, the road is the most common metaphor. Everybody writes road stories, right? Homer is a road story. The Odyssey is a road story, right? The Wizard of Oz is a road story. Tolkien is a road story. Okay? Going on the journey is the metaphor that all of these great authors in Western, Chaucer is a road story, right? Bunyan's a road story. They're all great road stories. Why? Because you're trying to find a metaphor to describe the way that a person grows. The way that the internal change within a person, and the road, the yellow brick road, is the outer metaphor of the inner change. The story of the yellow brick road is not that she gets from the land of the Munchkins to the land of Oz. Dorothy grows up. She becomes a person. She gains, and the qualities you meet along the road, right, are the qualities of mind, heart, and hand, right? You meet the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, and you gain courage, wisdom, and emotional depth. That's the growth of the character. That's the growth of the human being. The Torah is a road story. We're going to go from Egypt to Canaan. We're going to go from the house of bondage to the promised land. But what this indicates is that's not the real journey. The real journey is from bondage to freedom. From a character that belongs to the slave to a character that belongs to a sovereign person, a free person. And how that happens within the people is going to be the story of the rest of the Torah. I mean, the Torah had been a much shorter book, if they'd gone the other way. They got to the promised land, it took 2 weeks, they settled, good night. The whole Jewish year would be much shorter because that's what you'd think, but the impression is this people's going to take some time to bake. They have to change. Becoming a free person doesn't happen quickly. And the idea that they will go back, that the idea that you go back to slavery, you will see something ahead of you which is dangerous, and you will go back to slavery. That is such a remarkable insight. People who choose the life of bondage because the life of freedom's too scary, because having too many choices, and having to take responsibility for your choices, and having to deal with the insecurity of not knowing what tomorrow is going to look like is too scary, so people will go back and say to Pharaoh, take me home, rule me, but protect me, and make my life secure and guaranteed. This is a wonderful insight. So the question is, how do you get people to throw off Pharaoh internally and not just externally? That's going to be the great question at the beginning of the Torah. Yes, Marcia, hi.
Why did the Egyptians give everything to the Israelites?
Yeah, because they stole it from them. Yeah, God made them. Yeah, so that we ripped off our neighbors. We went and borrowed can openers and coffee makers, and they gave us all this stuff. Yeah, it was a terrible thing we did. Well, all right, take a look. I think it's an ugly thing, but you can decide how you want to interpret it. Because the Torah is trying to figure out why it is that when we get to Egypt, when we get into the desert, we have all this stuff. We have enough gold to build a calf. How did slaves end up with gold? So every woman went next door and borrowed the earrings of her neighbor, and there was a miracle occurred, and they gave them the earrings, and we took them with us. And that becomes part of the story. They try to explain that detail of the story. Here we go. Buckle your seatbelt. We're about to see what happens, right? Okay, yes. Elon, hi.
Maybe it's an odd question. But
There's no odd questions here.
so sometimes people prefer freedom and sometimes they prefer slavery.
Yeah.
How is it that you differentiate, and how do people come to make that decision as a people, as an entire society, to prefer one way or the other way?
How do people make that decision? Tell me.
I don't know. We're going through some of that now. And
Are you dragging me into politics again? Do you know what a difficult week I've had, How dare you drag me back into politics? Yes, you're right. Tell me, this is, how do people make these decisions? How does a culture make a decision? It's a very interesting question. Yeah, please, Wes. Go ahead.
It's not a matter of what we're doing here. You can see it in the Arab Spring.
Right.
And you can see it in Russia.
Right. You see all over the world examples of people who bolt into freedom and then retreat. Right? Who will bolt into freedom, take the bold move of assuming freedom, and then find that it's too difficult to deal with, or that it's too expensive to deal with. Right? That they want something else, or someone promises them something, and they want to come back the other way. This is really, just open the newspaper. This is the story, right? In every corner of the world, there's this back and forth, this oscillation between the drive to freedom and the fear of the uncertainty that comes with freedom, or the fear or the resentment of the messiness of freedom. One of the problems with freedom is people don't do what you tell them to do. The good thing about a dictatorship is it's pretty predictable, right? But you have freedom, and people, people go all kinds of, they create weird art, create weird, right weird, weird things, and you have to deal with the messiness of freedom. So some people find that difficult, and it's fearsome. It's a place of great fear. I want to be able to control the conditions of I want it nice and neat, right? Sit quiet. Anyone ever been in line in Israel? Right. No one's been in line in Israel. A free people doesn't wait in line, So you're waiting for a bus, and a little Moroccan lady with 2 chickens in her basket gives you an elbow in your face and takes your place on the bus, and you say, freedom, Right? In other societies, they wait in line and they queue up. It's really very nice, You could learn to love dictatorship because they queue up. Yes?
Another example of this would be prisoners who are released after years of incarceration.
Yeah.
Trying to reacclimate themselves to daily life.
Yeah.
And then there's a high rate of recidivism because
Yeah.
they can't.
It's hard when you've grown into the 4 walls of the prison. It's very hard to go into the craziness of the world beyond. It's exactly right. Yes, please, yes. Yeah.
Isn't it the same as raising children?
Oh gosh.
Your child is not free to do what
Yeah.
he wants.
Yeah.
So you do put them into boundaries.
Yeah. And then we say, go be free. And then to our dismay, they come back. What are you doing here? I said to my kid. He said, I'm moving home. Why? Like, don't you want to be free? Go fly, little bird, fly. Just fly away, damn it. No, they yeah.
Start at a young age.
Yeah.
You're being told what to do.
Well, this is the paradox of teaching freedom, right? The paradox of teaching freedom and independence is, how do I as a parent, how do I as a teacher, how do I as an authority teach freedom? You see, I want you to, in a certain way the Torah has it right. I want to teach you so that you'll rebel against me, because it's the rebellion that will make you free. You see, but you have to be a very wise parent to know that the rebellion is part of the developmental process and not just a smart-ass adolescent mouthing off to you. Okay, right? That takes a wise parent. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the same, but even leaders have to learn. President Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, he was used to telling people to do things. They go, yes, sir, and they went and did it.
Yeah.
When he became president, the same thing.
Yeah, it's amazing, what presidents have to deal with. And that's all I'm going to say. I do not want any more angry emails. Did you notice that I stopped, right? I just want that documented. Yes, please, Sherry.
So I think that the freedom, slavery, how do we get there? It's what we struggle with all the time. We don't just become free. Like every day, it's like safety, freedom, and questions all throughout our lives. I don't think we just get there. I think it's part of that duality of we have free will, we choose between good and evil, we struggle between slavery and freedom.
We want someone to tell us what to do. You have this idea that, tell me what to do, right? Give me some guidance. It's difficult to know what to do. I remember taking my kid into Baskin Robbins for the first time. Remember Baskin Robbins? Oliver Shalom, 31 flavors? You ever take a 5-year-old into a place where there's 31 flavors? Like, eat chocolate. Okay, I'll have chocolate, right? And by the way, this is true. This is the substantiation of your point. You know what the most popular flavor at Baskin Robbins is? Vanilla. Just think about that for a minute. Right, now you learned something. All right, here we go. Ready? Page 401. So Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp between Picharot and Migdal and the sea, for Baal Zephon, the camp and facing it. Right? So what's going to happen? We're going to run out of Egypt, and we're going to stop in front of the sea. And now I want you to think of each character and their psychology. What are the people thinking now? No. We're free. We're free. We're free. Our parents were slaves. Our grandparents were slaves. Their parents were slaves. As of yesterday, we had no hope except that our children would be slaves.
Do they know what's free?
Yeah. Because there's no taskmaster telling me, and there's no one beating me, and they're beginning to feel it for the very first day. Your first morning waking up as a free person. Just that's what they thought. And there's the sea in front of them, and it's quite beautiful, right? I'm going to skip the next because I don't want to give away what's going to happen. When the king of Egypt, we're verse 5, ready? Now the scene changes in my movie, right? The scene changes, and we're back in the palace. When page 401, verse 5, it's the last verse on the paragraph. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, what is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service? What's Pharaoh's problem? The night before, he told them to get the hell out of his country. Now he's told that they left. Now he's told, come and sit. This place to sit. Now he's told that they left, and suddenly he has a change of heart. A change of heart. Now, in the movie, by the way, for those of you who like movies, what happened in the movie, remember? Oh, yes. This is a great 1950s interpretation of that verse, right? From the beginning, Moses and Ramses were rivals for the heart of Nefertiti, right? Moses split, so Pharaoh marries, who was it?
Yvonne de Carlo.
It was Yvonne de Carlo?
No.
It was Ann Baxter, right? Wasn't Ann Baxter? That woman, right. She always loved Moses more, right? Right? So what happens? She resents the fact that her child died the night before, and she turns to him and says, what sort of man are you to let slaves rule you? And all of a sudden, it's all about his macho, his huevos, his manliness. She challenges his manliness. And he has to prove that he's a guy, right? All of history, that's the Freudians, that's not a Freudian, that's the 1950s interpretation. Tell me Pharaoh, what is Pharaoh thinking now? Come on, give me Pharaoh's internal thoughts. The night before he let them go, he's seen 10 plagues decimate his land.
I made a mistake.
Why? Why did I make a mistake? What mistake did I make? Tell me. Why? Why is that a mistake? I got rid of these people. I don't need those. Do I need them? Do I need the work? Is it worth it?
He's weak.
He's what?
He's weak now. He feels that he's weak, that he gave in at an inopportune time. He just let himself become weak.
He let himself become weak. And he can't appear weak in the eyes of his people. He can't appear weak in the eyes of his own eyes. He can't appear. That's what the movie's about, where he appears weak in front of it. But the idea that he gave in to some. He's God. Remember, he's Ramses. He's the son of Ra. He is the son of the God. He is divinity on earth. He is surrounded by all these accoutrements of power. And for a moment, he's been defeated. He's a failure. He's been defeated by whom? Who defeated him? A bunch of slaves. Not an army. If you're conquered, that's one thing. Never, but you're conquered. He wasn't defeated by an army. He's defeated by slaves. Are you kidding me? This is how it will be written into history, that the great and mighty Ramses was overcome by a band of slaves? Are you kidding me?
And a man who was in his own house who learned from him.
Well, he's actually his brother. Remember we talked before about...
I'm talking about Moses.
Yeah.
Defeating...
Yeah. Moses and Pharaoh grew up in the same household. Now, presumably, they may not have known each other because Pharaoh had a lot of wives. But let's for a moment follow that pattern, Brian, because it's brilliant. Genesis is about brother stories. Remember, we talked about this. Cain and Abel, Noah's sons, Abraham and Lot, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and the brothers. Now you can say Moses and Aaron, we'll get that later. But what about Moses and Ramses, his brothers? Moses and Ramses, his brothers. You fight with your brother for the blessing of the father. Remember? That's what Genesis is all about. He gave in to his brother. Right? Now, what's the story about? It's the rash of it's what happens when you think with that part of yourself instead of thinking with your head. Having seen Egypt just decimated, his answer should have been a pragmatic answer. Let him go. It's not worth it. We'll find other slaves, Not hard to find slaves if you're Pharaoh. But there's something here going on. There's a psychology of weakness and strength going on. Right? Weakness and strength. So he says, what does he say? He ordered his chariot, took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots, the rest of the chariots, and all of all the officers, with the officers in all of them. By the way, how many Israelites are there according to the Torah? 602,000 men between the age of 20 and 50. How many people is that? 3-4 million? You're going to defeat a people of 3 million people with 600 chariots? Think about that. It'll be messy. But it's like a prison riot. I mean, think about this for a second. Even the story doesn't...
Who did the counting?
I did. I did. Somebody you can trust. The New York Times, right? The Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. See, so who had the change of heart first? Pharaoh did, and once Pharaoh decides he's going to go get him, then what does God do? He stiffens his heart. What does that mean, by the way? Think about that. The decision was made, let's go get those guys and kill them. Then God made him sure he was right. You ever make a bad decision and then rationalize it and make sure, and then you look back and you say, what was I thinking? You ever have that experience? Let me tell you about that experience, right? As the Israelites were departing defiantly, the Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the... So this is the end. Now, what I want you to think about is this. Imagine this was a cantata, like a Greek play, right? So we'd have a chorus here, and here's what the chorus would sing. You can actually do this. We should sing it, right? Verse 9 is the chorus's line, which splits the scenes, right? As the Egyptians gave chase to them, the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen, his warriors overtook them and encamped by the sea. Now, meanwhile, back at the sea, what are we looking at? We have the people of Israel. We have the people of Israel camped, right? We have the sea in front of them. Pharaoh's coming from behind. What happens next? Ready? As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Now, if you see an army coming to kill you, what's your impulse? Run. You want to fight or flight. Either be prepared to fight or run like hell. But we're Jews. What do Jews do when imminent, impending danger crashes on you? We fetch. We become exquisitely articulate in our complaints. We become literary in our kvetching. This people that couldn't utter a word before suddenly becomes Shakespearean. They said to Moses, listen to this. This is so beautifully cynical. Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? Now, in case any of you ever have aspirations to be a leader in the Jewish community, I want you to hear that. In case any of you ever say, oh, I want to be president of the synagogue one day, I want you to hear that. What? He took them out of slavery. They were throwing their children into the Nile. They were smushing their elders. They were raping their wives and daughters and sisters. He brought them out of there. And weren't enough graves in Egypt? Right. And poor Moses. Now, so the people, what's their problem? Tell me about the people. We've talked about Pharaoh. We talked about God. What's the people's problem right now? They're terrified. But they're more than terrified, because that question isn't just a terror. That question is, oh my God, we're going to die. That question is, there's a cynicism to that question, right? What's the cynicism in that question? Come on, you hear the cynicism? What is cynicism? Cynicism is to live in a world without hope, to live in a world without escape. I knew it. I knew it. It's every wife would turn to the husband and say, I knew we shouldn't have left Egypt. This was your damn idea. I knew it. I told you this was dangerous. I told you this was a bad idea. I told you we shouldn't go. I told you. Because to live in a closed universe, cynicism is to live in a closed universe. Come on. Cynicism is to live in a closed universe. Hello, Bubala. Come learn Torah. Not this part, though. Hold his ears. To live in a closed universe where there is no escape, where you can't imagine an escape. That's cynicism. And the people are trapped in their cynicism. This is an indication of their slavery, of a cognitive slavery. It's not that the slave wears shackles on his ankles. It's not what enslaves a people. What enslaves a people is that they cannot imagine any other condition of being. They can't imagine themselves as free people. They live in that condition of cognitive slavery. That's why the Hasidic tradition, which was so sensitive to the inner life of the text, would always ask, what if you're a slave and you don't know you're a slave? That's the greatest slavery of all. And then they ask, to what are you a slave and you don't know you're a slave? And what happens when someone tells you you're a slave? You don't want to hear it. That's part of the cognitive slavery. So it's the cynicism, right? What have you done in taking us out of Egypt? Isn't this the very thing we told you in Egypt? Saying, let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Wow. Whoa. What a picture of the human being. Just as a snapshot of a human being. So constricted, the human soul so crushed and constricted by slavery, I can't imagine becoming anything else. Right? So people read stories of the Holocaust. How come they didn't run away from the concentration camp, rebel in the concentration camps? You know, because day to day, this is your condition. You can't imagine living outside of it. Isn't this what we told you, right? So poor Moses has a problem. Now we'll switch from the people to Moses. What's Moses' problem? Moses has a great skill. He's good at leading sheep. For 40 years, he was a professional shepherd. What's the advantage of leading sheep? They don't talk back. You say, we're going here, they go with you. You say, we're going here, they go with you. If there's no grass, they don't fetch. Right? They don't, sheep are sheep. Right? And every leader imagines himself as a shepherd. It's one of the great tropes, one of the great themes of Western civilization is we imagine our leaders as shepherds, right? The Pope is a shepherd, right? Jesus is a shepherd, right? You know, Abraham Lincoln was thought of as a shepherd. That's great if you're a shepherd. But there's one difference between being a shepherd and being a leader. What's the difference? People, especially Jews, talk back. Moshe doesn't know what to say. He has no words. Lo ish devarim. I'm not a guy of words. I'm not, look, I'm good at sheep. Damn good at sheep. Give me sheep. I'll get them out of Egypt. People, not so. Moses doesn't know what to say. So all he says is, have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance of the Lord, which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you'll never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace. In other words, he turns to the people, and in his great power, he says, shut up! Shut up! God will take care of it all! And then he runs into the tent, and he says to God, what do I do? I think the first thing he says, like, what did you bring me here for? I had sheep. I was happy. I was happy in Midian. I told you. Right?
That's what the Israelites say.
Right. So he goes in and he screams to God. He's like, and God, now this is wonderful. God says to him, what the great direction of all leaders, right? What does God say? Right. God says, why you cry out to me? Well, I'm about to die. That's usually what people do. Tell the Israelites to go forward. Go forward. Now that's going to be the theme of the whole book, right? Go forward. Can you learn to go forward, right? Lift up the rod, hold out your arm over the sea. The Israelites will march on the sea and dry ground. I will stiffen the hearts of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's coming down the hill with 600, chariots with spears, but everybody has time for soliloquies. You see how this is written? There's all these beautiful soliloquies, right? Right, you'd say all God needed to say was go, But no, we have to have a speech, right? So he steps forward and says, I will stiffen the heart of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. I will gain glory through Pharaoh and his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am the Lord. I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and the horsemen. And you notice that the Torah judiciously leaves out Moses' answer. Moses says, whatever, right? Just whatever. Okay, fine. Just... Right, so what's God going to do? What is all this? God has arranged all this. Now you realize that God has arranged all this. Why did God arrange all this?
Build faith.
Because to build faith and to be, not even to build faith would be, I think you're being much too generous because you're a nice soul. Gain glory. This is all about gaining glory. Right? I set all this up so I could gain glory. Right? Once and for all, one mighty act of remarkable glory. Right?
The greatest God of all.
The greatest God, the greatest of all. World champion, right? World heavyweight, super heavyweight champion. All right, so the angel goes back and holds back the Egyptians. Turn the page. You got to find out what happens, right? You don't want to leave here without knowing how. It came to pass the army of the the cloud came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of the Israelites. There was clouds with darkness and cast a spell upon the night so that one could not come near each other all through the night. Last year when we did this, I showed you something, and I'll just show you again. There's two stories here. One is the story that was told by the populace, the sort of Seder table story, and the other is the story that was told by the priests, which was the sacred story. Okay? The one is the one you've seen in the movies. Mighty sea, Moses holds his hand, mighty sea opens up. Great cinema, right? The other is a more popular story, which is more realistic, right? It wasn't a mighty sea, it was a swamp. It was a marshland. It was I forgot there's a name for this. A marshland that's tidal. It was a tidal marshland, right? Estuary, is that what it's called? Okay, so it was an estuary. So in a tidal marshland, at certain times of the day and night, the tide comes in and the tide goes out, right? If you know when the tide's coming in and the tide goes out, you can cross the estuary, right? So you'll notice the two stories are edited together so that they seem to fuse, but you can separate them and you'll see these things. So the cloud comes between the Egyptians and the Israelites all night. Why all night? Because the tide's moving out, and the tide's going to be at low tide first thing in the morning. Watch what happens. So you have these two stories fused together. Because the point of it is not the glory of the miracle. You'll see that in a moment. The point of it is that we end up free on the other side. Oh, I gave away the end. But we end up free on the other side, right? Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their left and on their right. So that's the big cinema scene, right? You get it? The Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army in panic. He locked the wheels of the chariots so they moved forward with difficulty. All right, now what happened? So the first story is, the Egyptians are right behind us. Moses holds the sea. The sea opens up, just like you saw in the movie, right? And the Israelites walked through, and there was this wall of sea on the left, and this wall of sea on the right. And there's a beautiful midrash that if you looked into the wall, you could see the great fish of the sea swimming by. There goes a dolphin, you know? It's like walking through the Monterey Bay Aquarium. That's what it looked like. That's story number one. Great cinema.
I wrote that.
I know you did, right? Mark wrote the Midrash because later on we're going to build the Mishkan. The Mishkan is the tabernacle, the shrine. And one of the elements of the Mishkan is something called tachashim, which means dolphin skins. So the Midrash shows you out, dolphin skins? Where the hell do you get dolphin skins in the Sinai desert? So Mark answered the question, right? When they were walking by, they reached in, pulled out a few whitefish, you know, and a few dolphins. No? Go ahead.
It was the dolphins splashed water on the Pharaoh and made the dry land into mud.
Ah.
And that slowed down the Pharaoh.
Yeah, okay.
Then, however, the sheep were wandering through the wall of water.
Right.
Which is nowhere if you're a sheep.
Right.
And so the dolphins were nudging them back.
Right.
So they had to nudge the sheep back, flip their tails and water the ground so Pharaoh couldn't go forward.
Ah.
And God says to the dolphins, move, go. I'm going to close up the sea. And they kept doing it to save the people. And in the end, when the waters crashed together, the dolphins were pulled down. And next morning, God said to Moses, get the skins and use the skins to cover the ark so that whenever anyone approaches the ark, they will remember you did not get out of Egypt without a lot of help.
Oh, very nice. Very good. That's why I always loved going to SeaWorld, you know? Because every time one of them fishies jumped, I said, Chaver! I'm here, we're free again, you know? Brother! That's beautiful, thank you. Okay, you ready? We're in the middle of it. So the one story is that one, right? But you can see the other story edited in here, right? The tide goes out. Moses leads the people across the tidal basin, the estuary. What happens to Pharaoh's chariots? They get stuck in the mud. You don't drive a chariot into a marsh because it's going to get stuck in the mud, right? The Egyptians said, let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians, which is a nice way of saying, to hell with it. You know, it's not worth it. The Lord said to Moses, hold your arm over the sea, and the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and their horsemen. Moses held his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled its approach. But the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The water turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea, but not one of them remained. But the Israelites marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall from the left and right. That's the chorus once again. So you have these two stories put together. One was a more naturalist story, and what's a more fantastic story? Let me ask you a question. Where was Pharaoh? What happened to Pharaoh at the end? Did he die? No. Did he die or did he live? Where was he? Where was he? All right, so if you imagine Pharaoh, how do you know, by the way? It doesn't say, right? It says his chariots were drowned. It doesn't say he drowned. Why does he have to stay alive for the story?
Because he has a good line at the end of the movie.
Yeah, that's true. But that's why Cecil B. DeMille kept him alive at the end of the movie, right?
His God is God.
His God is God. Right, that's right. Which if Yul Brynner says it has to be true, right? What happens to Pharaoh? Why doesn't Pharaoh drown? Because the whole thing is about teaching this man that he's not God. Teaching this man that there are rules to the universe that he has to observe. Now, just for a moment, step back from the scene. I know you want to sing, but step back from the scene. This image of splitting water, does this remind anybody of anything? If you have a thumb, put a thumb here, and go back with me all the way to the beginning of the beginning. Yeah, all the way to the beginning of the beginning. Look at page 6 in the Chumash. Look at page 6 in the Chumash. Ready? This is day 2 of creation. Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water. And God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above. And so it was so. And God called the expanse sky. And there was evening and morning a second day. Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, to dry land may appear. And so it was so. And God called the dry land earth. Water in Genesis is there from the beginning. Water is there before there's anything. If you go all the way back to the beginning, back to the very, very beginning of the story, you don't even have to turn. I'll just read it for you. Right? In the beginning, God creates heaven and earth. The earth being unformed and void, chaotic, darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. What's water? Water is the stuff of uncreation. Water is the mess of being before anything is put into order. In order to have life, in order to have cosmos, an ordered physical universe, you have to separate the water out. Separating the water is the way that cosmos comes into being. Because water is chaos, cosmos is order. And in order to create a habitable world, God has to open the water and create a habitable world within the expanse of the water. That's physical creation. That's physical creation. Now we have a second act of creation, which is very self-consciously making the Genesis story. The opening of the water, the separating of the water, separating chaos. This is the chaos of history. Chaos in history is when people are turned into things, when men think that they are God, when nations imagine they are almighty. That's the chaos of history. And what is God going to do? He's going to open up that chaos and create a space for a journey from slavery to freedom. That's the ordered process of history. Nature has an ordered process. We call it nature, we call it cosmos. And history has an ordered process. It's the journey from slavery to freedom. And the image of the opening of the water is the initiation. It's the opening act in both dramas. This is the beginning of history, because history has an order to it. And what's the fundamental rule of history? Human beings move from slavery to freedom, and sometimes they move back again. Human existence moves from Egypt, and I would suggest to you that the promised land is Eden. That's the image of the promised land, from Egypt to Eden. That's the journey of history. And the great rule of history is says that journey is inevitable. I think that's the lesson of the narrative. No matter where you are, whatever condition you find yourself in, you're part of the journey from slavery to freedom. And your task in life is to move forward toward freedom, toward the promised land, toward Eden, toward a place of order. That's the progress of history. And anybody who tries to hold it back, anyone who tries to force upon this and think that he's more powerful than this process, you may end up enslaved to him for 2, 3, 4 generations, but he can't last forever. So the story tells you 2 important truths. One, evil exists. There are evil people in the world. There are evil rulers. There are evil powers in the world. Pharaoh is a very real piece of the story. But there is a bigger reality. There is a rule to history that will inevitably, eventually, always come to pass. That's the 2. And redemption is possible. And suddenly the Israelites understand that they don't have to be slaves. Their world opens up. Their minds open up. That's what this is about. Yes, Douglas.
There are plenty of historical examples of people that never in their history experienced freedom.
Yeah.
From the beginning of time till now.
Yeah.
So when you say it's inevitable,
yeah.
How is it inevitable when if you were born in an Arab country from the beginning of time till now,
right.
You've never tasted freedom?
Yeah, well, but,
China.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's not. But okay. So you have a paradigm of human existence, right? This is a model of human. This is an understanding of human existence, right? It's an understanding of human existence that's not based on empirical study of the cultures of every people in the world. It's based on the experience of one people. And from our experience, this one people understands this is how the world works. Okay?
Or should work.
Or should work.
It hasn't worked.
Well, but that's the point. That's our model. Now, can you find counter models? Of course you can. Here's what's more remarkable to me. You have a people who has suffered more from the world than virtually any other people that you know, and still maintain this model. We don't go back to being the people we were on the other side of the sea. We don't give up this model. In your Pesach Seder, why do you do this at the Pesach Seder? Year after year. And listen, look at the way the Pesach Seder is ordered. The first half of your Seder is all about the Exodus that was. You talk about the enslavement, you talk about the plagues, you talk about Moses, and you get to this point just before supper. The sea has to split so I can serve the soup. Right? Just before supper, the sea splits and we sing Dayenu. Right? And you go into dinner in the Seder as a newly freed person. What happens after supper? Besides the fact that everybody falls asleep and finishes the wine, right? What happens after supper is you take that same model and you impose it on the future. And you say, one day, the world will be liberated with me. Right? That's how they... And why do you invite Eliyahu Hanavi into your table? He's the precursor of Messiah. And what's the last line of the Seder? No, that's not the last. That was added later. The last line of the Seder, well, that's good too, though. The last line of the Seder is Ve'yata Kodesh Baruch Hu. Right, V'sha'achat lemalcha maves Chad Gad Yachad Gad Ya. And comes the Kodesh Baruch Hu at the end and liberates humanity from the slavery of death. That's the ultimate, the ultimate liberation of all of us, right? And then L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, which they didn't mean next year I'm going to the La Rome Hotel and taking a suite. Although I've thought about it a lot. A lot. If I could afford to get out of here for a few days, I would. It means next year in a liberated world. This becomes the driving paradigm of the Jewish vision of the world. That's why this Torah portion is so important, because this is the driving paradigm of our vision of the world. There are rules to history in the same way there are rules to cosmos. And the rule to history is the drive from freedom, from slavery to freedom. But it's not inevitable. We have the faith that it's inevitable, but you have to work for it. It's inevitable if you're willing to jump in the water. Brian. Good.
take from that is, I agree with that, and when you believe in your mindset that this is how things should be,
Yeah.
regardless of what happens along the journey, that's the ultimate outcome. And so that's why the Jews still today, 2,000 years later, have a stake, or look forward to this, or look forward to that, despite all the horrible things that have happened. The mindset created the belief, which then created the reality.
Right. If you believe that I'm not a prisoner, I'm just temporarily incarcerated by a cruel world that will one day yield to my will to make it gentle, you live in a very different way. But I want to show you one last point before we finish, because I know that you're saying, wait a minute, that's too optimistic for this rabbi. You know, that's too glorious. He won't let us leave on that high, right? He's got to spoil it before we leave, and you're damn right I will. So turn. I know you wanted this, so I just lost the place. I'm sorry. I intend to. Right. Turn to page 412. So we cross the sea and we begin to sing. Michamocha bailim Adonai, right? La 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 la. Or if you're Sephardic, you know, Az Yashir Moshe Uveneh Yisrael. And there's this song and there's this dance and for this glorious. And if I were writing the movie, that's where it would end. The song, and because that's the wonderful thing about movies. You know the wonderful thing about movies? They end. Right? They end. You know, she finds her way back to Kansas, and the credits roll. Right? The little hobbit throws the ring into the volcano, and the credits roll. Right? That's the wonderful thing about movies. They have this narrative arc, and the narrative arc comes to a close, and you walk out of the theater going, ah. The problem with life is that there's always a next day. There's always a next day, right? How long do you think Dorothy lasted in Kansas, having spent all that time in Oz? Who would want to live in black and white Kansas when you can live in Technicolor Oz, right? How long do you think, come on, how long, what happened next? And the Bible has a wonderful sense of dialogue. The Bible is, are you okay? The Bible is not a monologue, it's a conversation. It's a dialogue. And there's another voice. What we've just read is the voice of the revolutionary, the voice of the ideologically driven radical, the voice who said all it takes is one big bang to liberate people. That's all they need. Power to the people. That was my generation, right? All you have to lose are your chains. That was my dad's generation, right? Radicals in every generation have this vision that we can change the conditions of human existence and we will change human beings, liberate them from their eternal slavery. That's the eternal optimism of the radical, of the revolutionary. And it's beautiful, and they write such good songs. Revolutionaries write such good songs. Realists do not write good songs. Revolutionaries write good songs. But if you're going to liberate the world, you've got to hear the voice of the realist. And the realist says, okay, finish your dancing. Go ahead, dance, sing, dance. Now, before you leave the shul today, I want you to know one more thing. What happened next? Turn the page, right? Page 412. Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds, and they went on into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days. Okay? 3 days. What is the half-life of a miracle? 3 days. In 3 days, that ecstasy wears off. That sense, the dance is forgotten. The song is put away. In 3 days, 3 days in the wilderness, and they found no water. You ever go 3 days in the desert without water? It's kind of scary. You know, they didn't bring any with them. They didn't bring canteens or something. What? Hello? They came to Mara, but they couldn't drink because it was bitter. That's why they called it Mara, right? And the people grumbled against Moshe. You know, you gave us freedom. True. You defeated the Pharaoh. True. You smashed Egypt. True. But we're thirsty. What shall we drink? So he cried to God, and God told him what to do. And then there's a whole bunch of commandments, right? Then turn the page, turn to 4:14, right? Setting out from Elim, the Israelite community came to the wilderness of Sin. Now, Sin is Hebrew, Samech Yud Nun. But I'm sure there's a preacher in America somewhere going, we are in the wilderness of a sin. That'll be a sermon you'll hear one day, but not from me, right? Which is between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month. So 6 weeks we're in the wilderness now. And what happened? 6 weeks we're in the wilderness. 6 weeks you forget what it was like seeing children thrown into the Nile. And 6 weeks you forget the lash of the slave master. In 6 weeks you forget the horrors of slavery. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the Israelite people said, and once again, you Jews, I have to tell you, when you're angry, you become so articulate. I'm telling you, and I know this for a fact. I mean, I just, listen to this. If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, where we sat by the flesh pots. What's a flesh pot? Is that like hibachi? Is that what that is? Like the barbecues. God, you remember Egypt? Oh my God. The meat, the ribs, the burgers, the chops. Oh my God, the midnight buffet with the chocolate fountain and the fresh strawberries. Oh my God, the cherries Jubilee and the bananas Foster every night. Oh my God, the free bar service. What a place was Egypt. Do you remember? Oh my God, do you remember? And here's poor Moshe. I gave you freedom. I saved your families. Oh yeah, but chops, steaks, burgers. We ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us to death. Something's wrong, guys. What's wrong? What happened to this people? It's not like, thank you for liberating us. Slavery was an utter horror. Now can you help us find some food? That would be like reasonable, but that's not how you Jews respond. Whose voice is this? Whose voice is this? No, come on. You got to know. If the song and the splitting of the sea was the voice of the revolutionary who believes that history inevitably moves from slavery to freedom, and by changing the conditions of human life, we can change the human heart and soften it and make people love freedom and life, whose voice is this? The victim, the reactionary. It's the what? Yeah, but it's a bitter nostalgia, right? It's not like it's the fantasy, right? You know, it's I love when Herschel sings his songs about the old country. You know, Romania, where the anti-Semitism was so bad it embarrassed the Nazis. My state of rebels, tuberculosis, starvation, plague, and hunger. My state of rebels. What's wrong with you Jews, right? Wherever you are, it's not nearly as nice as where you were, right? Right? You know, if you live in the valley, when we lived in Fairfax, it was so much nicer, right? And Fairfax wasn't nearly what Boyle Heights was, and Boyle Heights wasn't nearly what Chicago or New York or Toronto was, and that wasn't nearly what Eastern Europe was. So there's this nostalgia, you're right. But there's something deeper than this, right? What's going on here? Yeah, Eli.
I don't know that they ever have changed their mindset from when they left.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder why they ever left in the first place.
Well, that's the question.
They were still the slaves that, for some weird reason, convinced.
So the realist says to the revolutionary, you've done a wonderful thing. You've rescued this people from slavery. You've changed the conditions of their existence. But don't assume they're going to change so fast. You need to know the stubbornness of the human heart. Mark, go ahead, please.
So if I can conclude here,
please, go ahead.
by giving my deep thanks.
Yeah.
Because this is a year this week since Tommy died, the priest,
yeah,
my friend. And a year roughly since you have been so kind to allow me to sit into the class.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you
Oh.
publicly for the graciousness of allowing a Schreier like me to be in it. And offer, the last thing Tommy and I did together was to pick the God Squad joke of the year. Every year we picked a joke.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with priests and rabbis,
Yeah.
and that wasn't dirty, and that was funny.
Right.
This was the last winner, and it explains the answer to why nothing changed after the Exodus. So this is a joke about the Yeshiva University crew team.
That's a very famous joke.
Which is
Yeah.
the actual joke.
Go ahead.
There.
Yeah.
That's the joke.
That's the.
So the Yeshiva University crew team loses to Harvard in a 2-mile race. They lose by 1 mile and 7/8.
Right.
So the rabbi calls in the coach of the crew team, Mendel Goldberg the third, because it's the crew team.
Right.
And he says, Mendel, I don't ever expect to beat Harvard, but unless we do better, you're fired. About a week later, Mendel comes running back into the rabbi's office, says, Rabbi, it's okay, we're going to do better. I know, I went to Cambridge, I hid behind a bush, I watched them practice. And he said, I know their secret. So the rabbi said, what's their secret? He said, they got 6 guys rowing and only 1 guy shouting.
That's a good joke.
That is why nothing changed. Because in the Jewish community, we have, everywhere but here, we have too many people shouting and not enough people rowing.
Ooh.
To save our country, to save our people, and to make the words of Martin Luther King finally come true.
Amen.
The arc of history moves toward freedom.
Very nice, very nice. So, that was beautiful. So can I add one line of Rashi to that without ruining the effect? Without ruining the effect? Here's the one line of Rashi. Okay? We've talked about each of the characters in the story, right? We talked about why Pharaoh chased him. We talked about the people standing at the sea. We talked about Moses' dilemma. Right? Right? Who does all the work? Who is the actor in this story? Who is subject and who is object? Who is the actor in this story? Well, Pharaoh goes chasing them to the sea. Moses holds his arm out. God does everything. What do the people do? They follow like sheep. Right? You don't involve them in the process of their own liberation. If they're not involved in the process of their liberation, they're never going to be liberated. So the question is, how do you switch from 6 to 1 to 1 to 6? How do you turn over the process of liberation to make it the responsibility of the entire people? And for that, you got to come back next week. Okay? Have a good Shabbos, everyone. Take care.